Today we are going to start with the next chapter, The Enemy by Pearl S. Buck. Let me throw some insight into this chapter. It is a thought provoking story which highlights how a doctor's duty as a trained medical practitioner towards a patient makes him rise above narrow national prejudices. He risks his honor, position, and life, as well as that of his wife and children, by sheltering a runaway prisoner of war of the enemy camp and saving his life. The conflict in the doctor's mind as a private individual and as a citizen with a sense of national loyalty is beautifully portrayed. That means in this chapter, we would see that how humanism got better points than patriotism. First, let us throw some light into the life of Pearl S. Buck, the author. Now, she is a Pulitzer winner, she's a Nobel Prize winner, and moreover, she believes in brotherhood and equality. If you would read her other works, they just center around the brotherhood and equality, that is peace in the world. That means, according to her, it is humanity that really is very, very important, that overshadows all the other aspects of a man's personality. Now, what is the theme of this chapter? The theme of the chapter is humanism transcends. As I have already discussed, humanity plays a very important role, and the story reveals the conflict between the East and the West. That means the world was divided into two, that is the American and the Japanese, where it was the Japanese. You would have heard about the Pearl Harbor incident as well, where the American and the Japanese were in conflict with each other. So this particular story throws light onto this particular conflict. The background, what is the background of this chapter? It is the US and Japan war, that is 1941. I've told you it was the Pearl Harbor. Japanese were superior over the Americans. Now let me give you the introduction regarding this chapter for you to understand before we proceed on with the chapter. It is the time of the World War. An American prisoner of war is washed ashore in a dying state and is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. So, who's the doctor? The doctor belongs to which country? Japan. And the prisoner of war, he's an American. So, though both the countries were at war with each other, let us see whether the oath that was taken by the doctor comes to the rescue of the American one, or the patriotism really gets over the Japanese doctor. Should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? That means humanism versus patriotism. The story is set during the Second World War. A Japanese doctor finds an American prisoner of war at his doorstep. He's in a dilemma that being a doctor, should he save the wounded man, or being a Japanese, should he hand him over to the enemy, to the army? Now let me brief you about the chapter. The scene of action is a spot on the Japanese coast. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house. Remember, he's the central character. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was a low, square, stone-built house. It was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach outlined with bent pines. Sadao's father had a deep concern for his son's education. So Sadao had been sent to America at 22 to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine there. So just imagine the entire story. It is going to reveal Dr. Sadao taking care of the American prisoner of war when he himself had been sent to America to study the surgery and the medicine. He returned at the age of 30. He was 22 when he was made to go from there, and 8 years later, at the age of 30, he came back to his own country. He became famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist also. It was the time of the World War. Japan was at war with America. Dr. Sadao had not been sent abroad with the troops. So surprising. Let us see why. The old general was under medical treatment and he might need an operation. So Dr. Sadao was being kept in Japan. He was not sent in the war, but rather he was kept in order to attend to the general. Sadao watched mist-height outlines of a little island near the shore. Then it came creeping up the beach below his house. His wife Hana came out and put her hand on his arm. It gave him pleasure. That means it really relaxed him, soothed him. Then she laid her cheek against his arm. At this moment, both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He staggered a few steps. Then the curled mist hid him again. Hana and Sadao leaned over the railing of their veranda. They saw a man crawling on his hands and knees. Then he fell down on his face and lay there. They thought that it was perhaps a fisherman who had been washed from his boat. When they came towards him, they saw that he was wounded. He lay motionless. They saw his face. Hana whispered that he was a white man. That means he was an American. A very important quote that you really need to lay stress on. Sadao began to search for the wound. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. In order to stanch the fearful bleeding, he packed the wound with the sea moss. The man was unconscious. He moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Sadao muttered, "What shall we do with this man?" Now here it was the patriotism that had got over Sadao. Now here Sadao did not behave as a doctor. Whatever he could do as a doctor, he did at that point of time. But then he was in a dilemma. What should he do? Should he save the man or should he hand him over to the enemy? He said that the best thing that they could do was to put him back into the sea. Hana agreed with it. Sadao explained that it was a very difficult situation. Why? Because when you become a doctor, you take the oath of humanity. You are going to keep your enmity far behind and you are going to treat your patient as a human first. If they sheltered a white man in their house, they would be arrested. If they turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die. They were staring upon the inert figure with a curious repulsion. Then they tried to find out what he was. He looked American. The battered cap had faint lettering US Navy. They concluded that he was a sailor from an American warship. The man was a prisoner of war. He had escaped and was wounded in the back. Hana asked Sadao if they were able to put him back into the sea. Sadao hesitated. This hesitation itself showed us that it was the humanity in him that was getting over the patriotism. If the man had been whole, he could be turned over the police. Whole means if at all, if he would have been conscious, without any difficulty, as he was the enemy. All the Americans were his enemy. But since he was wounded, they should not throw him back into the sea. So doctor got the better of this patriot. Hana observed that there was only one thing left to do. They must carry him into their house. Sadao was not sure about the reaction of the servants. Hana suggested that they must tell the servants that they intended to give him to the police. She said that they must do so, otherwise all of them would be in danger. Together they lifted the man. He was very light. They carried him up the steps and into the side door of the passage. They carried him to an empty bedroom. Since the man was quite dirty, Sadao suggested that he had better be washed. If she fetched the water, he would wash the man. Hana could not bear to touch the man. She offered to tell her servant, that is her maid Yumi. Sadao took the responsibility of informing the others also, because it was very necessary to inform the other servants. The pallor, the expression of the unconscious man's face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart too was yet alive. Sadao observed that he would die unless operated upon. The man was very young, perhaps not even 25. The man had to be washed first. However, the servants refused to do so. Why? Because he was the enemy. Firstly, he was the enemy. Secondly, they were afraid of the Japanese police. They did not want their master to heal the enemy. Hana washed the man till his upper body was quite clean. Sadao put his instruments upon a sterilized towel. He began to wash the man's back carefully. He asked Hana to give the anesthetic if he needed it. Hana choked. She clapped her hands to her mouth and ran out of the room. He heard her retching in the garden. She had never ever seen an operation. Sadao proceeded swiftly. Hana came in. Sadao asked her to saturate the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. She had to move it away a little when he breathed badly. Then Sadao got busy. He felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard. It was just near his kidney. So the patient was being operated in the house of the doctor. Then, with the cleanest and most precise incision, the bullet was out. The man quivered, but he was still unconscious. Sadao gave him an injection, and the man's pulse grew stronger. Hana had to serve the young man herself, for none of the servants would enter the room. The man grew stronger day by day. The servants decided to quit if their master kept the enemy hidden there. On the 7th day, the servants left together. Hana carried the morning food to the prisoner. On coming back, she asked Sadao why they could not see clearly what they ought to do. In the afternoon, a messenger came in official uniform. He asked Dr. Sadao to come to the palace at once, as the old general was in pain. Hana breathed a sigh of relief. When Sadao came to say goodbye, she revealed her fear. She had thought that they had come to arrest him. Sadao promised to get rid of that man for her sake. Sadao told the general about the man he had operated upon. The general acknowledged why Sadao was indispensable to him. The general promised to send his private assassins to kill the man and remove his body. He asked Sadao to leave the outer partition of the white man's room to the garden open while he slept. Sadao went home, thinking over the plan. He would tell Hana nothing. He was surprised to see the young American out of the bed and preparing to go into the garden. He complained that the muscles on one side felt stiff. Dr. Sadao said that the exercise and massage will be helpful. He then asked Tom, the young American, Tom is the name of the prisoner for the American, to go to bed. Sadao slept badly that night because he did not know what to do. His conscience was not allowing him to kill the man, yet he did not know what to do. He was in a dilemma, he was in a fix. The next morning, Sadao went to the guest room and found him asleep. The second night also passed. The young man was still there. He had shaved himself. There was a faint color in his cheeks. So as a human, he really had succeeded. But what about a patriot? Now he was really terrified. Dr. Sadao told him that he was quite well then. He offered to put his boat on the shore that night. It would have food and extra clothing in it. Tom might be able to row to that little island not far from the coast. That means he wished to send that prisoner of war away. It had not been fortified. Nobody lived on that island as it was submerged in a storm. Since it was not the season of the storm, he would be alive there till he saw a Korean fishing boat pass by. As soon as it was dark, Sadao made preparations to help the young man escape. He also gave him flashlight. He asked him to give him 2 flashes as the sun set in case his food ran out. In case he was still there and all right, he was to signal him only once. He was warned not to signal in darkness, for it would be seen. The prisoner was now dressed in Japanese clothes. So just imagine, the humanity got better of the patriotism. And now the prisoner of war, the American prisoner of war, was dressed in the Japanese attire, so to escape unnoticed. A black cloth was wrapped around his blond head. He found the way to the boat. Sadao waited till he saw one flash from the shore. Dr. Sadao had been called in the night to perform an emergency operation on the general. It involved his gallbladder. For 12 hours, Sadao had not been sure the general would live. Then he began to breathe deeply again and to demand for food. Sadao had not been able to ask about the assassins. So far as he knew, they had never come. In fact, we can say that the general had forgotten all about the matter. The servants had returned. The room was cleaned. 1 week after the operation, Sadao felt that the general was well enough to be spoken to about the prisoner. Sadao informed him that the prisoner had escaped. The general asked the doctor whether he had not promised to kill the man for the doctor. He then confessed the truth. He had been suffering a great deal. So he thought of nothing but himself. That means the general had become selfish and he could not even allow himself to go against the doctor because the doctor Sadao was indispensable for him. So he had forgotten all about his promise to send an assassin to kill the American. He had forgotten his promise. That night Sadao waited at dusk for the light from the island. There was none. His prisoner had gone away and was safe. Sadao wondered why he could not kill the young man, though white people were repulsive. So the entire chapter deals with, though, that is, it was the patriotism that should have been instilled in Dr. Sadao of having killed the enemy, not having taken the side of the enemy, but it was the humanism, it was the doctor inside him, the spirit of doctor inside him that really helped him to save the American Tom. Now let us see the main points to remember in this chapter. Dr. Sadao's Hauki's house was built on a spot at the Japanese coast. Sadao's education was the main concern of his father. He had been sent to America at the age of 22, but he returned at the age of 30 back to his country, Japan. And he had gone there to learn surgery and medicine. He had met Hana in America. His father would not have received her until she had been a Japanese. Their marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Presently, they had 2 children. Both of them saw a man crawling on his hands and knees. They saw stains of blood on the sand. The man was wounded. He was a white man with a rough yellow beard. That means he was an American. He was a prisoner of war. Dr. Sadao found that a gun wound had been reopened. Dr. Sadao packed the wound with the sea moss. The man cried in pain but remained unconscious. They were in a fix. If they gave shelter to a white man in their house, they could be arrested. If he was turned away, he would certainly die. The man was an American sailor and a prisoner of war. He was their enemy because all Americans were their enemies, and there was a war that was going on between Japan and America. The man would die if he was not operated upon. Dr. Sadao and Hannah decided to carry the man into the house. The servants did not cooperate with Dr. Sadao and Hannah. They did not want an enemy soldier to be saved. Hannah cleaned his breast and face with hot steaming water. She helped her husband to turn the man, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. With the cleanest and most precise of incisions, the bullet was taken out from the body. The young man woke. He was very weak and terrified. Hannah asked him not to be afraid. They did not want to save the enemy, but humanity in them made them save his life. The man was not even 25. He looked very young. He asked what they were going to do with him. But being a doctor, Sadao was trained not to let the man die. However, saving an enemy was nothing less than an act of treachery. Sadao examined the wound carefully every morning. At last, the last stitches had been pulled out. The old general thought it best to have the American quietly killed. He could send his assassins to kill him that night. Sadao agreed, but perhaps it was the best thing to do. But then, he did not know he was still in a dilemma. But that night, Sadao put his boat on the shore that night with food and extra clothing. He asked Tom to row to a little island to freedom. Sadao went in to treat the general as he was in pain. Sadao informed the general that the American had escaped. There was no signal from the island. The prisoner had gone off and he was safe.